Back in early 2016, I did a video on weird guest characters in fighting games, and a lot has changed in the fighting game landscape since then. We've seen a myriad of guest characters across many fighting games that have a lot of thought put into them. Compared to the old days of fighting games, we've seen less guest characters that were goofy, like Gon in Tekken 3, and I do love the goofy ones, and rarely any guests that only use existing assets, like Akuma in X-Men Children of the Atom, or Earthworm Jim being a palette swap in Battle Arena Toshin Den. So when we see a weird guest character nowadays, there's usually a good reason they're on the roster that we should not judge so quickly. Because of that, I want to revisit some of the questionable choices of guest characters in more modern fighting games. To clarify, questionable does not mean bad or lame. Every entry on this list is incredibly fun to play, and I was happy to see them in the game once I got to know them better. I just mean that their inclusion seems bizarre at first, and maybe it makes more sense when you look into their history. And by modern, I guess I mean PS4, Xbox One era and later, but there's a few from the PS2, Xbox, PS3, Xbox 360 era I still want to highlight, so we may dip a bit further back for an entry or two. We're pretty loose with criteria here, and no restrictions on the number of entries per game, which means get ready for Mortal Kombat and Tekken talk. Now, let's inquire about the top 10 questionable guest characters in fighting games. Number 10, 2B in Soul Calibur 6. This one is pretty straightforward on why it seems odd at first. Soul Calibur is a weapon-based fighting game that takes place in the 15 and 1600s, and 2B is an android from a year that has 5 digits. However, it's not as strange as it seems when you look at 2B's game of origin, Nier Automata. It has her hack and slash her way to victory with her many blades. You got the big sword and the bigger sword, and they just float behind her. So if you ignore the fact that she's an android from the distant future, her use of fast-acting swordplay is a proper fit for Soul Calibur. She can attack from full screen, glides on air, and has her multiple swords swing around her without even needing to touch them. When you think about it, those are all things that Cervantes has done in the series for over 20 years, so her core gameplay is not only true to her game of origin, but naturally fits with the Soul Calibur mechanics. I sometimes get so caught up in fighting that I forget how different her aesthetic is from the rest of the cast. It's mostly when she shows off her obvious future technology where I'm like, oh yeah, she's not powered by magic, that's why she's a questionable guest. Comparing her to the other two guests in this game, she appears as the most out of place, since Geralt from The Witcher is from the Middle Ages, and Haomaru from Samurai Showdown is from another pre-1800s weapon-based fighting game, so 2B didn't stand a chance in terms of blending in. Even when the Star Wars characters were guests in Soul Calibur 4, they could just say that they were from a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, and that long time ago could have just happened to be during the 1500s in Earth time, and they also made a plotline where Darth Vader tracked down the wicked soul-edged sword on his radar, so they theoretically are in the same time period. 2B, though, had to time travel, which isn't unheard of for Soul Calibur guests, perhaps we'll cover an example later on this list, but it's indicative of how her design didn't quite line up with Soul Calibur aesthetics. But as I said, I don't put too much weight on that. Her gameplay is great in the Soul Calibur world, so I have no issue with this robot futurizing the past.
Initiating attack program.
We'll continue to until our day of reckoning comes.
Number 9, Rash in Killer Instinct. Here's one from the original list, and he was the most recent guest when that video was released in 2016. How things have changed. Rash is from Battletoads, a beat-em-up game where you're a trio of mutant toad people in some sort of virtual reality space world. They can transform parts of their body for hard-hitting attacks, and it's overall very cartoony in nature. Compared to the other two guest characters in Killer Instinct 2013, Rash sticks out out like a sore thumb being a 90s cartoon-style Toadman. Looking at the other two guests, Arbiter from Halo fits with the dystopian robot sci-fi theme of Killer Instinct, and General Ram from Gears of War was fine. I could take him or leave him, but he blended in well enough with the cast. Rash, though, on an aesthetic level, is sort of an odd choice looking at the aforementioned gritty sci-fi designs of many of the characters. However, at the same time, this is a fighting game with a raptor, a guy on fire, and an ice alien who can squish his body, so Rash being a giant shape-shifting Toadman isn't far off from the standard Killer Instinct fare. They also modernized his cartoony body by making his texture fit the Killer Instinct look with a semi-realistic Toad skin model. I don't know if he was ever meant to be this HD. You can see all the pores and wrinkles on his body. It's kinda weird, but I also like it. It reminds me of when Super Smash Bros. Brawl gave Mario realistic denim overalls. But how does Rash play in Killer Instinct? Excellent. It's the fast-paced Killer Instinct fun that you're looking for, and that's all that matters in the end. I love all the references in his attacks, especially his big boot and ram's horns, and he comes in like a wrecking ball mid-combo. He also maintains his radical 90s attitude throughout, so his body language is just as cool. The explanation for him being in the Killer Instinct universe is interesting too. The real-life reason is because Killer Instinct and Battletoads were both developed by the company Rare in the 90s, which is now owned by Microsoft, so they had the rights to both games and decided to use them, and now we have some crossover action. Pretty simple. But the in-game reason is because in the Battletoads story, Rash was a human technician testing a virtual reality machine, and him and his teammates got transported into the video game world, where they mutated into the Battletoads. So him being in Killer Instinct is essentially a fourth wall break, since it's just another video game world that he encountered on his virtual travels. You can even see the wireframe of him being virtual phasing in and out of his character model in Killer Instinct, being another reference to the original Battletoads. An extra fourth wall break is in his win quote when he says, "These cameos are killing me," likely in reference to him being a guest in Shovel Knight around the time of this guest appearance too, showing that he's really on a big video game journey. So Rash may not be a perfect fit with Killer Instinct's aesthetics, but you can tell a lot of care was put into his design and references.
These cameos are killing me!
Number 8. RoboCop and Mortal Kombat 11. Mortal Kombat gets ever more creative with their guest characters in every game, and Mortal Kombat 11 definitely adds some characters that you wouldn't think to see in a one-on-one fighting game. They were spread out among the downloadable content releases. The first batch of DLC had 3 guest characters, Terminator, the Joker, and Spawn, and the final batch had 1 guest, Rambo. But they snuck in 1 more guest in the middle batch with the story mode expansion, RoboCop, and I remember seeing a lot of people confused about this one. Compared to the 3 guest characters that came before him in this game, RoboCop wasn't particularly requested like Spawn was, nor did he have a new movie coming out like Terminator at the time. And while RoboCop is from an action movie franchise, doesn't it feel like he would be too clunky for direct combat? He seems like he would be better prepared for just tanking out hits and using his weapons. And, unlike other guest characters from movie series in the Mortal Kombat franchise, RoboCop didn't really remain relevant throughout the late 90s and 2000s like the slasher villains or the Terminator, outside of that one reboot that didn't go anywhere. So players in their 20s and maybe even 30s are less likely to know about RoboCop beyond pop culture references. But you know what? Looking at the history of Mortal Kombat and RoboCop's design, I think he unexpectedly makes sense, though I'm not sure if he just makes sense in hindsight and they only picked him because they liked the source material. Think about it, when I saw they were putting a cyborg cop in Mortal Kombat, I was like, yeah, this fits. Mortal Kombat is known for its cyborg ninja fighters, and they famously, or infamously, had Stryker, the cop with guns and a baton, so RoboCop has the credentials of a classic Mortal Kombat fighter. They even gave him a Cyberlin Quake costume to show how well he blends into the cast, and his playstyle is the goofy fun I love from Mortal Kombat. He's very clunky in how he walks, but but it's a good clunky. It's very smooth in how stiffly he moves his limbs. And I love how direct his moves are. He has a command grab that just lifts you up and looks at you for a second to identify your threat level, and if you enhance it, he takes you for a little walk to the corner. No theatrics, just lift you up and put you down. The Sector fan in me also loves his flamethrower. And then of course, he's got a bunch of guns, but my favorite is just when a gun drops from the sky into his hands and he's like, I will use this now, thank you, and then discards it. Really, whenever he shoots upwards, there's something kinda hype about it. He's just like, I will keep you airborne since that's where you are. That being said, sometimes I don't even do combos with RoboCop because I have too much fun doing the airdrop gun over and over.
RoboCop wins.
You are coming with me.
Number 7. Negan in Tekken 7. Negan is from the American TV series and comic book The Walking Dead, which takes place during a zombie apocalypse, so you may wonder, how did he find his way into the Tekken universe? Well, simply put, Harada, Tekken's creator, and Michael Murray, one of the lead game designers, liked The Walking Dead and just asked the rights holders if they could put their character in Tekken, and they were cool with it. They even got Negan's actor, Jeffrey Dean Morgan, to voice the character and modeled it after his likeness. But does his fighting style work in Tekken? Well, I guess so. He just fights with brawling and his baseball bat named Lucille, so the way he combos, it feels like how a Tekken character would play. I generally feel that full-on weapon wielders don't really fit well in Tekken outside of Yoshimitsu and Kuminitsu, but something about an untrained fighter slamming knowledgeable martial artists with a blunt object doesn't feel out of place for the series. I think of him like Brian Fury, but with a bat. He doesn't have everything a Tekken character has, like no hop kick and some of his moves don't launch, but the overall feel is pretty good. As for if Negan's personality and tone fit in Tekken, well, I actually haven't watched The Walking Dead since the second season, so I don't know. But my mom has watched the series the whole way through, so I'll have her talk about Negan's history for this segment. Take it away.
I'm definitely a Negan fan. At first he was a true villain, but I think he redeemed himself by the time The Walking Dead ended. Watching this fighting scene gives me flashbacks to when he pummeled Glenn, my favorite character at the time, and Abraham to death with his bat Lucille. I didn't forgive him for a long time over that, but his storylines and dastardly manner sucked me into future plot lines. The backstory of Lucille was one of my favorites in the series, even though it took place in only one long flashback episode that showed his marriage before and during the apocalypse. Lucille was named for his wife, who had died of cancer after the apocalypse hit. His wife was played by Hilary Burton, who many may know as Jeffrey Dean Morgan's wife in real life, and made a lasting impression as she gave a truly kick-ass performance, knocking him down a peg or two with her verbal banter, and also giving a heartfelt performance during her illness in the episode.
So in the end, if you ignore the whole zombie apocalypse angle, Negan's backstory works with some of the other tragic, immoral, and sometimes redeemable characters in Tekken, though this is clearly pre-redemption arc Negan, so he doesn't fit all those traits yet.
See who wins thirsty. She is a vampire bat.
Number 6, Heihachi and Spawn in Soul Calibur 2. Here's the older game I was referencing in the intro. These are iconic guest characters, and while they're not the first in fighting games, I feel like them, along with Link on the GameCube version of the game, helped popularize guests being more common in fighting games due to how well they were integrated and how much they likely helped boost sales of the game. Each version of the game got a unique guest. PlayStation 2 got Heihachi from Tekken, Xbox got Spawn from the comics, and the Nintendo GameCube got Link from Legend of Zelda. Of the three, Link always felt like the biggest fan favorite. Nintendo is generally shy about lending their characters to non-Nintendo franchises, so it felt sort of surreal seeing Link among this cast. Plus, he fits thematically, being a swordsman from a world that looks like it could fit in the 1600s setting of Soul Calibur. Heihachi and Spawn, however, are from modern settings, so they had to make a time travel plot to facilitate them being being there, which was a reasonable explanation. It's a fighting game with an evil living sword. I can believe time travel exists here too. What was always weird to me though was how random they seemed. First, Heihachi. He was mainly weird since he wasn't a weapon wielder. Soul Calibur 2 already had a Tekken character that wasn't treated as a guest, Yoshimitsu. He was an ancestor of the one from Tekken, and it was cool seeing the sword guy from a fist fighting game actually in a sword fighting game, so the extra Tekken character didn't feel that necessary with Heihachi. However, Namco owns both Tekken and Soul Calibur, so they can do whatever they want with their characters. Plus, Tekken was a heavy-hitting PlayStation exclusive for a while, so extra Tekken for PlayStation 2 does make sense. And I think the way they implemented his quote-unquote weapon was clever. His metal wrist gauntlets act as his customizable weapon, so it's like his fists are the lethal weapons. As for Spawn, it was weird that one of the most iconic parts of his outfit could not be implemented, being his cape that moves in supernatural ways. Due to the graphics engine at the time, it was too difficult to get it to flow like it does in the comics, so they gave us the explanation that his cape can form any weapon that Spawn needs, which is true to the source material, so the entire cape turns into the axe that he uses. Once again, that's a clever way to address a limitation, and he's able to withdraw the cape in Spawn media, so it's not like it's blasphemy to have a capeless Spawn. He doesn't always have it on. It's just strange that he never shows it off in the game. Actually, we see his cape in exactly one image in his arcade mode ending, so there you go. I also used to be confused why Spawn was the Xbox exclusive character, since Spawn never really struck me as Xbox like how I associated Tekken with the PlayStation, but apparently it was just because Xbox was newer at the time of Soul Calibur 2's release, so Xbox didn't really have an iconic character yet, and Namco had a deal with Spawn's creator Todd McFarlane, whose toy company was making the Soul Calibur 2 figurines, and part of the deal was that his character would be in Soul Calibur 2, so there you go, that's how we got Spawn on the Xbox. I'm not sure if the deal was specifically for Spawn or just a Todd McFarlane character, since he got to design his own character for the game too, Necrid, so maybe Spawn was just extra, or maybe Necrid was the bonus. Either way, the story behind Spawn and Heihachi just kinda walking their way into these games has always intrigued me, and who doesn't have fun punching or slashing their way to victory? Especially punching. All these warriors think they need a weapon? Ha! Heihachi says otherwise.
I'd love to show this to that idiot son of mine.
Number 5, Raiden in Injustice 2. Injustice 2 knocks it out of the park with their guest characters, Raiden included, and having Mortal Kombat characters in the fighting game made by the Mortal Kombat developers fits with its history. When Mortal Kombat was developed at Midway in the 90s, the team loved to have their characters cameo in any games that they could, like when they were test characters in NBA Jam, or when Scorpion and Sub-Zero were playable characters in their third-person shooter, The Grid. And many years later, Scorpion was a guest character in the first Injustice game, and then Sub-Zero was a guest in the second Injustice game. Easy picks. But then when we got another round of DLC in Injustice 2, we got another Mortal Kombat character, being Raiden, who I would say is the next recognizable Mortal Kombat character after Scorpion and Sub-Zero, so it does make sense in that regard. Raiden's playstyle fits well here, just like the previous Mortal Kombat guests in the series, but the main reason he's on this list is because this is the only time that NetherRealm Studios has had 2 guests from the same franchise in any single game. We had guest characters from the same genres, and even ones that crossed over in movies, but they were generally good about franchise variety. We had Kratos and Freddy Krueger in Mortal Kombat 2011, Scorpion in Injustice, Jason, Predator, Leatherface, and Alien in Mortal Kombat X, and Hellboy, Sub-Zero, and the Turtles in Injustice 2. Even with all the guest characters in Mortal Kombat 11, they kept the variety, including the Joker from DC Comics in that game, though there were a lot of DC Comics cameos and costumes in Mortal Kombat 11. I know it's just one extra Mortal Kombat character in Injustice 2, but I always felt like they were double dipping with Raiden when they had plenty of other character options that could have taken his place. If they specifically wanted this roster spot to be an electricity-wielding character, there's lots to choose from. In fact, they kind of acknowledge that, since Black Lightning is a character swap costume for Raiden, so I was never never sure why Lightning wasn't the default roster member. He's popular in DC Comics, and he had a TV show coming out at the time, so it would have been good advertising to have him as the main downloadable character. And even if they wanted to keep him as the character swap costume, there were other electricity users people wanted to see in Injustice, like Static or Livewire. In the end, though, with around 40 characters on the final roster, an extra Mortal Kombat character in Injustice 2 isn't hurting anyone, and, as with Heihachi and Soul Calibur, the developer owns the character so they can do whatever they want with him. Plus, I'm kinda digging the Raiden outfit here. It's not something I would expect him to wear in Mortal Kombat, but it feels like he wanted to play superhero while he was in the game and wear something more comic book themed. He's got his chest out like he's Fabio, and why is he wearing a mask? Who's he trying to protect his identity from? Also, he goes hard with that super move. When he made that dragon out of electricity, I was like, ooh, shiny. Number 4, Rambo in Mortal Kombat 11. As mentioned in the RoboCop segment, Mortal Kombat 11 had 5 guests, 3 of which were staples of American action movies. Besides RoboCop, we got the Terminator and Rambo. The Terminator made a bit more sense in my opinion, since his initial appearance was basically as a slasher movie villain, which is a genre the previous games had plenty of guests from. Another reason I didn't put the Terminator on this list is because most of my reasoning why he'd be a weird pick would be similar to the RoboCop segment, where he seemed more like a robot who was just meant to walk forward and tank a lot of hits while shooting back. So that brings us to Rambo. Unlike those other 2 guests, Rambo was less about tanking hits and more about ambushing in his movies, since he was trying not to get caught by the law and any other antagonists. Obviously, with Sylvester Stallone's build, he'd be able to fight in one-on-one combat, and did in some of the Rambo movies, but normally being a sneaky commando, Mortal Kombat's style of fighting was not ideal for his movie references. But just as the NetherRealm crew made plenty of other characters work in this type of combat, they found a way to make Rambo fight face to face while still keeping his covert killing methods at the forefront of his fighting style. While he's got his knife for close up, many of his attacks push the opponent back to set them up for his traps. He's got a pendulum, a whip trap that can trip up the opponent, and he can also use that rope to get them by their feet to hang them upside down from a non-existent tree, leaving them open for combos, or just to be pushed back again. Even the way he takes out his gun fits with his ambush theme, where some bramble all of a sudden appears in front of him, and he pulls out the gun from under it to start blasting. He also has stances that have him crawl on the ground to fit with his covert operations. He has many moves he can do out of them, so while it's not optimal for typical close combat, it works here. While all these moves are played off straight, they unintentionally seem funny, like there always just so happens to be some leaves lying around every stage with one of Rambo's traps set up. Or how about one of his intros where he pops up under some leaves that he set up, despite them not blending into the stage at all. Obviously, these are references to the movies, but I like the implication that he got to every arena before the fight, uses the same forest-themed hiding methods regardless of if he's on Earth or in Hell, and then set up these traps before encountering the opponent where he's like, oh, this place? I've never seen it before, surely I had no time to prepare.
And
Rambo wins.
Number 3, Leatherface in Mortal Kombat X. Mortal Kombat X had 4 guest characters. The first duo of guests gave us Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th and Predator from Predator. Considering the previous game, Mortal Kombat 2011, had Freddy Krueger as a guest, Jason was a logical follow-up. And when we heard there were going to be 2 more guest characters in Mortal Kombat X to follow Jason and Predator, people expected the Xenomorph from Alien to go along with the Alien Predator crossover, and probably another slasher villain, and that's what we got with the last two guests. Alien found its way to the game, but what we got for the slasher guest was not on anyone's radar. People were thinking maybe Michael Myers or Pinhead from Hellraiser, but instead we got Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and the general reaction was confusion at first. While Leatherface is a threat in his movies, it's more because he finds people unprepared for the violence of his chainsaw, or just hits them with a hammer and brings them back to his domain. But in a face-to-face fight, or face-to-face mask fight, he's just a big lumbering dude with a heavy slow-moving weapon, so he loses his advantage on paper. A chainsaw can be a scary moving sharp object, but it's not as effective when dealing with the other sharp weapons in the Mortal Kombat series, unless we're talking Chainsaw Man. That manga changed the game for chainsaw wielders, though it's harder because Leatherface is not a fighter by design, but just as NetherRealm Studios turned other non-fighters into combat-ready warriors, Leatherface was a competent fighter in the game. Honestly, he's just kinda using his chainsaw like a big sword. He's definitely grinding it, but the way he swings it high, low, and in between feels like something akin to a big sword fighter like Kotal Khan. But because Leatherface is more unhinged than the other fighters, one of his fighting variations has a stance where he's ready to frantically run at the opponent with his chainsaw. I guess the chainsaw has the added bonus compared to a sword that it moves once he stabs someone with it, which adds to the gruesome nature of the weapon. Luckily, since this is a video game, they don't die right away, and it only hurts about as much as a hard punch in this game. And Leatherface gets creative with the chainsaw by using the sparks from scraping it against the ground as a hazard. He can also just throw the chainsaw as a projectile, which looks a bit goofy since it regenerates on his back a second later, but it adds to his campiness levels. He's a bit awkward overall, but he works out fine in the end. Besides fitting the brutal tone of Mortal Kombat, he was likely chosen as a guest since there was a Leatherface movie being released in 2017, with him being put in Mortal Kombat X in 2016. It's funny how that movie was called Leatherface, which was also the name of the third Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie, but Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3D was the seventh movie in the franchise, ignoring most of the preceding movies, while the fifth movie was also a remake called The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, along with another sequel to the original called Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 2022, while the original sequel from 1986 was actually just a dark comedy that has a poster that parodies The Breakfast Club. Good old Leatherface and his similar movie titles.
Leatherface wins.
Number 2, Noctis in Tekken 7. Noctis is the main character of Final Fantasy 15. I'm assuming he was put in the game as a guest to promote his game, which came out a year prior to him being announced for Tekken 7, and I'm not sure why they chose Tekken as the right place for him to promote said game. In terms of his character design, Noctis feels like he's from a modern environment, so that part of him fits in the Tekken universe. I like the way he was introduced in his Tekken trailer, where he got a phone call from one of the main Tekken characters, Lars, to help him with a mission, and his friends argue which of them would be best for the mission before Noctis is like, "See ya," and accepts. However, as I mentioned in the Negan segment, full-on weapon wielders outside of Yoshimitsu feel out of place in Tekken's cast. Considering Soul Calibur has the same developer as Tekken, I feel like Noctis would have been a better fit in Soul Calibur 6, which was only released a few months after Noctis was put in Tekken 7. They could have just done another guest character time travel plotline. But in the end, when you play as Noctis in Tekken 7, he still feels like a Tekken character, so they made him fit in. The fact that he summons his sword and other weapons rather than carries them the whole time also works out with Tekken lore, since we have plenty of supernatural powers tossed around all the time. If characters can shoot out eye lasers and dark energy, Noctis is not out of line summoning his various weapons. Wait, he can summon fire with those weapons too? And ice and other things? Maybe he's dipping into too many different elements of nature for a fair fight. My favorite parts of his combos are when he teleports in the middle of them. He probably could have reached his opponent by just jumping at them, but he found a way to sneak a little more magic into his playstyle. In the end, I don't think Noctis was a perfect fit for Tekken in terms of how his fighting style looks, but the way his weapon summons were integrated, they feel feel as smooth as when other characters fight with their punches, kicks, and anything else, so he works from a design standpoint. Plus, his moves can get super explosive, so there's also a hype factor when he gets going.
Hell yeah!
For honorable mentions, I'll rapid fire a few weird guest characters from 90s fighting games that were outside of the loose time range that I set during the intro of this video, most of which I covered on my original 2016 list. Gon in Tekken 3. He's a tiny cartoon dinosaur in a game with mostly human-sized characters. We only accept non-cartoon dinosaurs in this series, thank you very much. Akuma in X-Men Children of the Atom. This was the building block that we needed for the eventual Marvel vs. Capcom crossover, so I'm glad that they stuck Akuma in this game. Akuma Zero in Cyberbots. Capcom really liked putting Akuma references in their fighting games. Anita in Marvel Superheroes. She was just a test character that was left in the game's code, so she's more of an Easter egg rather than a full-on guest. Still, she's got a bunch of Darkstalkers references in her moveset, so I like her. Earthworm Jim in Battle Arena Toshinden. He's only in the PC port of the game because the publisher of the port also published Earthworm Jim, though he's only an alternate costume for another character, so he's not that hype in the end. And Pepsi Man in Fighting Vipers. The Japanese Sega Saturn port of this Virtua Fighter inspired fighting game had Pepsi Man, the Japanese Pepsi mascot. He's remained relevant thanks to the internet over the last decade due to his absurdity, so him guest starring in another fighting game would probably go over well. I don't have the Japanese port of this game to capture B-roll, so here's my Soul Calibur 5 character creation of Pepsi Man to compensate.
KO.
Since the topic is unquestionable guest characters, I picked the most baffling inclusion to me, the one where I had the hardest time rationalizing it. Number 1, Cole McGrath in Street Fighter Cross Tekken. Street Fighter Cross Tekken is a crossover game where Street Fighter and Tekken characters split an assorted roster of fighters to fight against or alongside each other in some cool tag team action. When a fighting game is already a crossover between two prolific franchises, we never see characters unrelated to either series or developer on the roster. It's already a special event, so you don't need outside fighters. Though, if the unrelated characters are from either developer, I think that makes sense, like when Capcom premiered their original characters Amingo and Ruby Heart in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. In fact, they sort of did that in Street Fighter Cross Tekken. The game had guest characters Pac-Man, which was made by Tekken's developer Namco, and Mega Man from the original Bad Box Art, who was made by Street Fighter's developer Capcom, and I think both of these characters were fun additions. More importantly, they still fit the theme of these two developers crossing over, plus Pac-Man was riding a Mokujin mech to get another Tekken reference in there, and Mega Man, while not fitting his original design at all, feels like a surreal parody that surprisingly worked out. He played like a Street Fighter character, and I wouldn't mind seeing him in future Street Fighter games, maybe with a retcon saying that he played Mega Man on TV or something to make him fit in the universe better. These characters were not on the Xbox 360 version of the game, and neither were the next three, which are directly connected to PlayStation. Two that were almost on this list were Toro and Kuro, who were the Japanese PlayStation mascots. While they don't fit in the game in terms of art style, they're just tiny humanoid cats, they related them back to the cast by having Toro play with Ryu's moveset and Kuro play with Kazuya's, bringing them back to that crossover theme. Plus, them being so cartoony almost feels like a throwback to a joke guest character like Gon in Tekken 3, so it's like an old school style guest, even if that wasn't the intention. However, the final guest on the PlayStation versions was Cole McGrath from the Infamous series, and the main reasons he's here are because of the choice of fighting game that he was guest fighting in, and the lack of advertisement around him. I actually think that his fighting style and overall theme work with both Street Fighter and Tekken, regardless of your opinion of the infamous games, with Cole being a guy who gained electricity powers in an explosion and can choose the paths to use his powers for the moral or immoral. You can see elements of characters from both fighting games. His fighting style is solid, with electricity, command grabs that levitate the opponent, and hitting them with a blunt object known as an amp, which enhances and controls his electricity. Once again, all this stuff fits with what the other fighters do. However, going back to my introduction to this segment, why put Cole in this game? I've justified how the other guest characters fit, but Cole just felt like he was thrown in there and got lost. The character select screen is split with the Street Fighter characters on one side and Tekken on the other, evenly distributed, and then you have an odd number on the Tekken side to fit Cole in there. He also doesn't have a story in the arcade mode. Even characters that don't have official tag partners get intro stories and endings, including some of the guests, but Cole can't even be accessed in arcade mode and doesn't have a story. Toro and Kuro are the only other characters without arcade mode stories, but they did get their own character theme songs, which every character in the game got, except, you guessed it, Cole. No theme song for him. These aspects made his inclusion feel unpolished, with his moveset being the only complete thing about him. Furthermore, there was no fanfare that this notable PlayStation character was going to be in the game. He appeared in the guest character trailer between both duos of guests, but more people were intrigued about the offbeat Mega Man that it took away from Cole's thunder. And on the box, they just write 5 exclusive PlayStation characters on the back with no elaboration that one of them is Cole. You gonna tell us who these guest characters are? Is one Kratos? Oh, I hope it's Kratos. Comparing it to other fighting games at the time, like Soul Calibur 4 and 5 or Mortal Kombat 2011, they put the guest characters right on the front of the box, so you'd know who they are and to make a big deal out of it. Mortal Kombat even managed to give full spotlight to their own characters, but give just enough room to let us know Kratos was in the game. With Cole no longer being the infamous protagonist, and the series having no recent entries at the time of this video's release, I don't think we'll ever get a chance to see him as a guest character in another fighting game, but Capcom at least showed us that he would play well in a Street Fighter game. So with his combination of blockbuster attacks, lackluster advertising, and a flustering inclusion, Cole McGrath's guest spot in Street Fighter Cross Tekken now makes him my most questionable fighting game guest character.
Here you go. Say goodnight.
Now, what did you think? Did all of these guests make you scratch your head in confusion at first, or have you seen weirder guest characters that were meant to be taken seriously in fighting games? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video.